Hello, and welcome to Acceptable Madness. My name is Scott McKinney, and today we're going to be talking about who Scott McKinney is. This episode's going to be about identity, and I'm not going to go into anything too philosophical, but I kind of want to explain where I feel my place in this world is, and why it's taken me a really long time to understand where that or what that position is, and how I've come to get there, and different stuff like that. So the reason I actually wanted to have this be the topic of this podcast was because I was actually talking to someone before I got laid off from my job, and as I'm recording this, I'm no longer employed there. But I was talking to a coworker, and they said that they knew someone that was having a hard time figuring out who they were and how they exist in this world, and really what makes them special, what makes them. So again, like, what makes Scott McKinney Scott McKinney? And it got me thinking, because it's something that I haven't really thought about in a while, because I've kind of started to discover my identity and what exactly my role is in this world. And so I was able to think back and think about how I've gotten to this position that I'm in. So just a little bit of background about me. I'm the youngest of 4 kids. All of my siblings are 2 years apart, so it's my brother, who is 28 as of recording this, my sister, who's 26, my other sister, who just turned 25, and then me, who is soon going to be turning 23. And basically, as I was growing up as the youngest, you start to figure out what kind of role you have in the house. So, my brother, he was the musical one. He was a lot more interested in games and socialization. My older sister was a lot more driven towards what her eventual career goals were. And she was also very invested in the track and cross country team, and she did very well. My other sister kind of followed in the footsteps of that sister in terms of she did cross country, track and field, and different stuff like that. And then there was me, who I did band. I did a little bit of cross country until I realized that I hated running. And but I did a lot of band and whatnot in high school and middle school, just like my older brother did. Well, every one of my siblings was in the band at some point or another. But so it kind of, you start to fall into these categories. So, like, we all played musical instruments, at least for a little while. We all had things that we liked to do outside of school, whether it was like marching band or cross country. But the actions that you take and the hobbies that you pursue, they start to identify you. You basically become them. That's what you're known for. Whenever I was in 7th and 8th grade, I had an afro because I have very naturally curly hair. And I mean, it wasn't naturally just an afro, but if I picked it out, then I could make one. I could have one. I had one occasionally, but I had long curly hair whenever I was in 7th and 8th grade. And I always wore the same clothes. Not day to day, they didn't smell or anything, but I had like a white t-shirt and gym shorts, whether it was 0 degrees or 100 degrees, that's what I wore. And so my identity whenever I was in 7th and 8th grade was this weird kid with the occasional afro and that wore very bland non-designer clothing. And I think that was my attempt at being as inconspicuous and unnoticeable as possible, while still having some type of identity. But the identity that I had and the one that I formed, it started to shift as everybody in my family got older. And it's because of just this perception that I had towards adulthood and my older siblings. And it was impossible for me, and I'm sure it's the case for a lot of people, it was impossible not to compare myself to the successes and the paths that my siblings and even parents and my friends were taking. And I'm starting to see, so I'm turning 23 soon. I'm in a good relationship, but I have a lot of friends who aren't necessarily at a place where they're ready to settle down and be in a relationship, or haven't really found the right person for them yet. And what that means is that they're starting to see their lives. Maybe they're 25 or 26 or something, and they haven't found a significant other, and they're starting to see all of their friends get married. And it's a weird thing to compare yourself to. But I did that just as someone that doesn't have a girlfriend or boyfriend or whomever. When they're 25, I was doing that same kind of stuff with my siblings whenever I was, as I was growing up. I was always comparing myself to them. I worshipped all of them individually for their own reasons. Like, my one sister is incredibly good. She was a very good student. She was in like a National Honor Society and stuff like that. So it was hard for me intellectually to see that and compete with it. And so I never considered myself the smart one out of my siblings. My brother, he went to college for music, and he was the oldest, so he went first, and he was the first one to experiment and with living in a dorm and having a roommate and going out of the house. And I vividly remember whenever he went to college, I was there to drop him off, and we went to a restaurant on the way back after he was already at school, and I was crying the entire time. I was probably like, 14. I actually would have been a little bit younger than that, but I was probably like 12 or 13, and I was bawling the entire time. And it was just because this huge change was happening. So then all of a sudden, his identity in my eyes changed to, he went from, outgoing band, someone that's in the band, has very musical tastes, to college student, and he actually went for music education. And so, he's going and doing that. My other sister goes to school for criminal justice 2 years later. My other sister goes to school a little bit undecided. She bounced back and forth between a few different majors and eventually ended on what she is now. But as that happened, every time one of my other siblings went to school, it was impossible not to compare myself to their successes. It was just, so I wasn't the smartest one in school. I wasn't the most musically talented one in school like my brother. I wasn't the fastest or the best runner like either of my sisters. I wasn't the most outgoing like them. I was just the youngest, and I really didn't have anything that, in my eyes, I didn't have anything that I could identify myself with. I played the trumpet in high school, and I played it a lot, so it would be easy to count myself as a musically talented person, but my brother had done it first, and along with that, by the end of high school, I hated the trumpet. I played it. I was in like 5 or 6 bands at the beginning of my senior year, and as the year progressed, I just kept quitting them because I was burnt out, and it wasn't what I was passionate about like my brother is. So, I start to see that, and I realize I'm not the most musically gifted one. I'm not the smartest. Again, I'm not the fastest, but I'm the youngest. And at that point, I wasn't writing. I wasn't doing this podcast. I wasn't reading. I would just kind of play a lot of video games, and I had some good friendships and good relationships with people, but I really, outside of band and whatnot, I really didn't have much. I didn't feel I had very much uniqueness or individuality in my everyday life. And so it was really hard to compare myself and see myself as something other than being in the shadow of my siblings who are doing something much more impressive than I was. And none of this is meant to be negative towards my siblings. They all did very well, and I'm happy for all of them and the place and the people that they've grown to be. And but it was weird whenever I was younger and I was in high school. And sometimes it's still kind of weird where I am now. Like, for example, I just got laid off, and none of my siblings have gotten laid off before. Like my brother, for example, he is a music teacher in a middle school. He teaches chorus, and he's very good at it. You can tell that he has this very good relationship with his students, and he's able to communicate with them in a way that he maintains authority, but he also can get their respect so that they don't so that they see him as a good teacher and not necessarily just a friend or not necessarily just a teacher. They see him as a mix of both, which is a really effective way to teach from what I remember in school. And so, but I just got laid off, and he has that teaching job, and he has a really stable income. And my other sister, she is both of my other sisters, one of them just got a promotion, and so she is a very stable job. But all my siblings have very stable jobs. And then there's me, who was working in an industry that was not necessarily flourishing, and which is very obvious based on my current circumstances. And I knew it beforehand, but being laid off is certainly a unique experience. And it's something that whenever I sit there and I'm thinking to myself, what should I do about this? And I think about my siblings, it's really hard to not compare myself to them in some way and just think, well, I'm the youngest and this is just what's happening. You know, my career is kind of a mess. It doesn't matter. All my other siblings are more successful than I am at this given moment. And it's really easy to think that. I think it all the time because I have a different way of approaching life, as does everybody. But I want to publish a book. I want to have a podcast that can help people. And I just have different goals than them. But it's still hard to, even with this completely different mindset, not to compare myself to them in some way. So right now, I'm looking at myself as, of my siblings and my parents, I'm the biggest failure of the bunch. Now, I know that might be an odd way to look at it, and pretty pessimistic, but I don't know if you've listened to any of the other podcasts, but I don't choose to think pessimistically. It just happens. It just floods my brain, and then all of a sudden that's all I can think of. So it's weird trying to figure out what my direction in life is. What's going to make my parents proud? What can I tell my friends and be happy about? Like, yes, I've written a book, but does that mean anything? Does writing a book that doesn't get published do anything because it's not mass distributed? It's not, it's easy to think that because it hasn't made any sort of public impact, it's not validating. So like, I think of myself as a writer, but I refuse to call myself an author, because an author is someone that, to me, it's someone that has already made it into the public space somehow. But I think of myself that way, but for the longest time, I wasn't even able to do that. I played video games, and I didn't have many hobbies that I was passionate about. And so, looking in my current situation and how I understand my role in this world, it's kind of hard whenever I look at the success that all my siblings are having. Now, move back in time 5 or 6 years to whenever my brother just graduated college, or my sisters. They all had their own struggles outside of college, just like every fresh out of college student is going to have. No one was laid off, happily, but they all had a hard time, getting their feet on the ground, going through what they had to do to get to the field that they were interested in actually working in. And so, for example, like my brother did not immediately get the job that he has now outside of school. He needed a bit of experience first, and he worked 2 jobs for a little while. And that's not, I know that for some people that's like second nature, but it's not something that, it wasn't his first choice. For sure, I know that he would have much rather had a full-time job that was a bit more stable. And, but whenever I was younger and he was going through that, I was in high school, and all I saw of him was he's an adult now. And as someone that was in high school or middle school looking at someone that's an adult now, it's crazy, because whenever you're younger, you have this really weird perception of adulthood. Like, it's going to be this, I don't want to say easy time. Everybody knows that you have to pay bills and whatnot, but you have an income. So you're dedicating your time in every day to making money that you can spend on yourself. And even though you have bills, you can spend it on the other money on whatever you want. You can put it in savings. You can pay off your student loans early, or you can just buy yourself like a new TV if you want, if you have the funds to afford it. And when you're a kid, and this is especially the case for me, I looked at adulthood and I couldn't wait for it. It just seemed prestigious. It seemed fun. It seemed better than being in school. My parents are both successful in their own right, just like everybody is. But I look at them and I love my parents. They did a great job raising me. And I look at them and how I view their successes and how they view their successes. And I was excited to be right up there next to them. So as my brother was struggling with not having the teaching job that he has right now, as he was trying to get to that point in his life, I wasn't able to acknowledge the fact that he was having all of these difficult times, and I wasn't able to understand the fact that being an adult, especially right out of college where you're basically reborn into the world with a different set of objectives, instead of going to school every day and just trying to get whatever grade you're striving to get, you have to work, you have to go to a job, and you have to do your job to a certain performance or at a certain level, and otherwise you don't get paid. And so it's this totally different environment. But when I was younger, it was so easy to look at my siblings and parents and other adults that were in my life and see that they were killing it and they were doing well, and that's what I want in the future. So my identity, whenever all of my siblings and my family and everybody were already in their adult lives, I felt kind of like an afterthought, because I was the last one to go through it. Everybody had already gone through all the struggle and all the confusion, so I was the least tested upon. So everybody else had their own thoughts and their own struggles, but they were all kind of worked out. So my parents and siblings knew how to walk me through those struggles whenever I came to them. So, and I'm grateful for that, but it still made it hard to really figure out who I am and what I meant in this world, other than just being the youngest. And I actually think that has in some way led to my desire to publish a book and get that kind of validation, and that desire to have this podcast reach more people. I'm happy with the people that it reaches. I actually couldn't be more thrilled, because I've actually talked to people that have listened to it, and I've gotten a range of responses, some of which just saying they'll listen to it before bed and they have an easier time falling asleep. And some people say that it's like listening to a close friend talking to you, and that's basically what it is. And so I'm super proud and super happy with myself and this podcast as a whole. But I still hope it reaches more people, just as anybody would. It's just, trying to find that success. And I think that there's a chance that maybe the reason that I'm trying to do these kind of grand hobbies and passion projects, like getting a book published and trying to make a name for myself in the mental health space, might come from the fact that I had a hard time finding an identity within my siblings that wasn't already done or overshadowed. And again, I can't stress this enough. It's not because anybody did anything wrong, but I wanted, and I still want, to make an impact on the world in my own way. And so when I look at my siblings who are going through these different things that I have yet to go through, my one sister just got married pretty recently, which is a huge step for her. She's the first of any of my siblings to get married. And, that's a huge step. My brother has a stable job. Both my sisters have stable jobs. And then there's me, who's just gotten laid off and is still trying to chase after these kind of wild and ambitious dreams, being a podcast and writing, as opposed to putting more time into my career, which is probably the safer bet. And so it's hard not to think like that and think in a way that puts me mentally, I don't know, kind of at a disadvantage, where I really want to make a difference in this world, but it's hard to when I don't know who I am yet. And these are all thoughts that I've had ever since the depression and anxiety started to creep into my brain, which happened around 8th grade. So I'm 23. 8th grade was probably like 15. So I'm almost 23. Sorry. So it's been almost 8 years of this, and I still don't know who I am and what my purpose on this planet is yet. And I think I'm figuring it out. But what I'm realizing is none of my siblings had that in mind either when they were my age. They were just trying to feel their way through life also, and they're just a few years ahead of me, so they were able to figure out what I'm figuring out now. And it's not, I'm not being compared to them in any way, not by my parents, not by their standards or anything like that. The only thing that's really comparing me to them is myself. And I don't know why. I think it definitely has to do with the fact that I really hope I can make them proud. I want to be more than just their little brother and the youngest out of 4. I want to be someone that can stand toe to toe on their own with them and, talk about what's exciting and going on in my life as opposed to just sitting there and listening to what everybody else is going on in their life. And figuring out how to make that a reality is fucking hard because I never know what's going to happen. And also, even if I was an only child, I'd still want to make an impact on the world, but it's super hard to figure out what you're passionate about and what you're really meant to be doing with your life at any age and with however many siblings. It's impossible. It's okay, maybe not impossible. It's really hard though. And you don't know until you just get lucky and stumble upon it. Like, I found out that I liked writing back in 8th grade, ironically, whenever I wrote this stupid little short story called Scott the Sexy Lumberjack. It was like 2.5 pages, double-spaced. It was really short, riddled with errors, and I had no talent in writing. But it was about Scott the Sexy Lumberjack, and it was his adventure to save this damsel in distress, some cliche shit. And the main villain was a horde of peanut butter bunnies, and he was able to defeat them by eating them. And I thought I was the shit. I thought I was the most clever person. And but it didn't occur to me that maybe writing it should be the avenue. Maybe writing is my passion. It was just something that I did, and it was for a school project, so I didn't put 2 and 2 together. The mental health. I want to make an impact on the mental health space in some positive way. And I've struggled with depression for the past however many years, probably like almost 8, maybe longer, maybe a little bit less. And it took me all 8 of those years to figure out how I can more appropriately cope with it to a point where I don't struggle to get out of bed in the morning all the time. And I used to. Now I have an easier time getting out of bed in the morning. Not on every day, but the majority of days, which is still a huge step. But it took a long time to go from I'm depressed and anxious, and sometimes I think about killing myself, to I'm depressed and anxious, and sometimes I think about killing myself, and I think other people are out there thinking the same thing, and maybe this can help. And it took a long time for me to make that connection of, well, I think these negative thoughts. Maybe I can help people by just explaining them, by just kind of going through my process. I'm okay with being vulnerable and putting myself out there. I'm okay with rejection. I get rejected by agents all the time. I just got laid off, so I'm going to be rejected by a lot more jobs in the coming weeks and months. Rejection at this point is in my blood, and I kind of crave it, because if I'm not getting rejected by someone somewhere for something, then it means that I'm probably complacent and not doing what I need to be doing at that given moment. So, being able to put myself out there is something that's been a huge positive in terms of figuring out what my identity is, because being vulnerable has allowed me to have a lot of very helpful introspection and think about what I really like. Think about whenever I was in high school, what were the things that stood out to me? Was it the fact that I spent a lot of time in the band room and played trumpet a lot? No, I didn't practice it enough. I wasn't the best in the band. And it was because I just didn't have that passion. So when I think back, what did I really like about school? I think about that story that I wrote and how it didn't impact me at all at that time, but right now it means so much to me and what I'm doing. And I also remember I was in English class. I think this was 9th grade. And I was talking to my teacher. Her name was Ms. Danner. And she brought up a poem called, I think it was The Death of a Ball Turret Gunner. And so in one of the world wars, or maybe it wasn't a world war, but back in the day, a ball turret gunner was actually someone that was in basically a dome on the bottom of an airplane, and they would have a turret, and they would sit in that dome and they would shoot. And it was always a terrifying experience for the people that were in that dome, because for any number of reasons, they easily could have died, whether it's just them getting shot and they're not as protected as the actual pilot or something. Maybe it's the fact that if the wheels don't come down when the plane was landing, then the ball turret was just crushed and the person inside of it was obliterated to dust at that moment. And so there was a lot of fear that goes into it. And I remember having an argument with my teacher, a friendly one. It wasn't negative. It wasn't mean-spirited at all. But she read this poem, and one of the lines was something along the lines of, they feared the black flak. And so flak is, it basically anti-air. And whenever it goes up into the air, it trying to shoot down an enemy plane, it has a blackish, grayish color. And so my teacher stopped and was like, do you know why they use the color black? And nobody answered. Nobody raised their hand per usual. It's exactly what you'd expect in high school. And I did. And I explicitly said, probably because the flak is black. And so straightforward, really stupid. Like it wasn't a super thought out thought, but even to this day, I still feel that way. Couldn't the author have just been explaining or describing it as opposed to necessarily calling this flak something else? Why did it have to be a metaphor? And she explained that it was a metaphor, and she was very strict or stern on her thought that it was just a metaphor for death. Because if you saw that flak, that was a good indication that you were going to die. And I just didn't buy it 100%. I understood where she was coming from. I just didn't 100% believe her. And I think it was just a descriptor. And so she came back to me and said, well, Scott, what if I put your name on a slip of paper and put it into a black box? What would you think? And I'm sure she was trying to get me to make that connection. Like the color black is ominous, and me being associated with it is, I don't know, potentially negative in some way. And all I said back was that my name is in a black box, and that box is the color black. And I know that that's a weird tangent, but the reason I wanted to say that is because just from that description, you can tell that was a vivid memory for me in high school. And I don't know why, other than it was one of the few times in all of my high school that I never tried too hard in high school. I was able to just kind of get by a little bit. That was one of the few times in high school that I really actually thought about something on more than just a surface level. And it stuck with me all these years. And even now, whenever I write, I like writing very literal stuff, and I like using metaphors and similes, but I like having very literal stuff because I don't want the author or the reader to always have to guess at what the author means. It's helpful, and having that reader guess what the author is insinuating can help build story, build plot, and build that relationship with the reader when they're reading your work. But for me, it was just, I don't think it has to be that confusing. And so, looking back at all of my siblings and myself in high school, was my identity a band student, a bander? I was in the marching band, I was in a jazz band, concert band. Was that my identity? Was it the fact that I tried to do track and field for like one whole day, and I brought a Frisbee so I could mess around with people and just toss it around? And, but then I didn't show up for day 2 because they were trying to get me to do these stretches that I didn't want to do. So can I identify as a runner or an athlete? No. I wasn't passionate about any of that stuff, but that's kind of what my siblings identified as. And I'm sure that if I were to talk to them at more length, they might not necessarily say that their identity is wrapped up in one thing, and I know it's not. But whenever I was younger, that's what they were good at. They were smart, they were musical, and they were athletic. And then there was me, who was this dumb goofball who wrote a story about a sexy lumberjack named Scott, which is the most arrogant, narcissistic, egotistic thing in the world. But that's who I was, and that's who I am, and I didn't know it yet. And not a narcissist and all those negative words, but like just a goofball who likes to write. And I didn't know that at the time, but that's what I've grown to know since then. And since then, I've been able to add to my identity. It's not as simple as I like to write stupid stories about Scott the Sexy Lumberjack. Now it's I want to help people that struggle with mental health by going deep into what I struggle with and how I cope with it. And I want to write because, it's an outlet for my depression and all those negative thoughts. The stuff that I write is pretty dark. And so this podcast I would recommend way before I recommend my reading, especially if you're in a pretty compromised mentality at that moment. But my identity just keeps growing. I went to school for marketing, and so I'm the business student of my family. I'm the one that went for that. I'm the one that's excited about going to watch the Super Bowl on TV, and I'm more excited about the commercials than I am the actual game. Not because I'm not a fan of football, but because I can't wait to see what kind of fuck-ups companies are going to do or what kind of magic they're going to put together in terms of their advertising. I can't wait. I love that stuff. And my brother is still super into music, but his identity keeps growing too. He's joined some athletic clubs. He loves hockey, and he started playing that. And, it just keeps growing. Same with both my sisters. Like I said, one of my sisters just got married, and that's basically adding an entire other identity into her own. Because at that point, just from circumstance and locationally, they're basically inseparable. And it's really cool. Whenever I was in high school, I didn't have an identity. I was the youngest. For the longest time, I was a crybaby. I was called Scooter Bubba as a nickname, and I hated it, and I cried over it. And I remember this one time I was in a bowling alley with my older sister and her friends, and they gave me the name Bubba on the bowling card. And I don't know how old I was, but I lost it. I just threw a temper tantrum because I hated it so much. And then I also remember another time where it was like the first day of summer, and I was so excited, and I had a scooter, and I went around my cul-de-sac, which is, it's uphill, and I was coming down the hill, and the front wheel of my scooter got caught on a crack, and I face planted and started bawling there too, and just crying my eyes out. And looking back, I know that it was just overreactions for both instances. It really didn't even hurt that much falling off, but it's hard to look past that whenever you're trying to form your own identity. And I still hear about stuff like that sometimes because it's hilarious. I'm able to look back at that and laugh at it too. Like 2 years ago, I tried to make burgers for my family, and I was excited. I was in college. It was the first time I was able to really cook what I wanted when I wanted, and burgers are my favorite food. I wanted to experiment with something, and I put cinnamon in the burger to try to add a little bit of sweetness to it. And I added like so much goddamn cinnamon that the whole burger was just garbage. Like, it tasted horrible. And that's something I haven't been able to live down yet either. And I never will. It was really bad. I don't deserve to live that down. But those things are starting to form my identity. I was a kid, and I was a crybaby as a kid, and I made a shitty burger one day and still got my family to eat it, and they really didn't want to. And I don't know. Looking back at the identity that I didn't think that I had whenever I was in high school or elementary school or all that stuff, that's the same identity that I have now. Now that I'm 22, I'll be 23 in 2 months. Now that I'm the age that I am, those are the exact same things that give me a bunch of stories to talk about whenever I'm younger, but whenever I get older and I can make fun of my younger self. But when I was younger, they were the end of the world. And again, like I said, seeing what my current situation is and seeing how hard it can be outside of college for some people, and knowing that all of my siblings have gone through the same kind of thing, it also adds some humanity to everybody, knowing that everybody's gone through the same stuff, whether they've gone to college or not, or whatever else. It's just everybody struggles sometimes. And so I'm not currently this failure as a marketing student or a failure as a son, brother, you know. I'm not a failure, and I'm not being compared to my siblings in that way. What I am is a guy who's going through all the hardships of anybody that's trying to make their way in this world. And someone that's comfortable talking about it to the listeners of this podcast and my family and siblings if it comes up. And it's cool. So I, Scott McKinney, am a writer, hopefully eventually an author. I have a podcast, and this is the 17th episode, so that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty long time commitment, and even for I think the first 7 or 8, I did it bi-weekly. So I've been doing this for about half a year now without missing an episode, and it's cool. So my identity is a podcaster, someone that wants to make a difference in mental health, and I'm able to take all of these things that I didn't know I was whenever I was younger and really apply them to myself now and try to become a better person. And when I was younger, I didn't know that that's what was happening. But now that I'm older and I do understand that that's what's happening, it's really cool. It's an entirely new way to look at life, and my own emotional and just my mental growth and my maturity and seeing all these things and being kind of self-aware about it. And it's really easy to just blink and not notice what's happening. But I've been making a really, really concerted effort to understand what's going through my head and trying to find a way to put it into words and put it into a podcast so that other people don't miss it if it's not on if it's just not on their radar, because it is easily overlookable. So in terms of identity, it's which I've said that word so many times in this podcast, and every time I say it, it sounds different and it feels weird. Identity. I sometimes there's a D in there instead of a T. Sometimes it's too articulated and it sounds like shit. So my identity is fucking garbage. But whatever I, Scott McKinney, was, am, and will become is a lot of fun. And I'm proud to have noticed that, because it gives everyone else on this planet more credit. Because I know everybody's going through their own struggles, and that it's easy to get stuck in your own little world. But when you step out of it and look around, it's cool. It's really cool to see that. It's cool. It humanizes people that you may have looked at with otherworldly gaze before. I used to think my parents were superheroes, and now that I found out that I'm getting laid, or that I'm recording this, I've been laid off. My dad's been laid off twice, and he was able to bounce back even though he struggled with it. And as a kid, I didn't understand the repercussions of it, but as an adult, I understand how absolutely stressful and confusing and difficult a time it can be. And knowing that my parents were able to take that in stride, figure it out, and not only that, make me and my siblings have a really good childhood is really cool. And I'm proud to call both my mom and dad my mom and dad. So finding your own identity is something that lets you discover other people's identity too, and what they want to be, what they do, and helps to understand how you can build a relationship with them better, and how you can really appreciate them beyond the surface level, or beyond the easy stuff. I don't walk up to people and talk about the weather anymore. I'm able to walk up to them and talk about what they're excited to talk about, and they'll do the same for me because I've given them that courtesy. And it's not a perfect science. I don't do it correctly all the time, but it's still cool to know. So the one thing that is kind of weird about this particular topic, though, is as I've been talking about it And I mean everything I say. Deep down, like, I know everything I'm saying is, I think that way. But I didn't think that way whenever I was in high school. And so, unfortunately, for the people that listen to this that are in high school or middle school, it's hard to say that there will be an immediate payoff or an immediate understanding of what I'm talking about, because you haven't found your identity yet, and that's perfectly okay. It takes a long time. It feels like it won't happen now. It felt like it wouldn't happen for me either. But then I found it, and I don't know. Maybe I'm arrogant, but I think I've turned into a pretty cool guy because of it. And I'm excited to continue that growth and hopefully become cooler every day. So, thanks for listening. And I hope you find your identity soon. And if you already have, congrats. Thanks for listening to this whole podcast about something that you already knew. Thanks. Bye.